And here we go. Welcome to Contemporary Issues class. Nice to see everybody on a sunny, nice February day. And we're going to
March.
March. That's right. What's wrong with me? Got to catch up here. March day. That's right. Spring is sprung. Thank you. We are going to have a great presentation today on empathy and how it is manifested in ourselves, our personalities, and why it's important to our religion also. And we are looking forward to Ron's presentation. So before we get started, the usual announcements, please mute yourself on the lower left corner of your screen if you're not already muted. And when you want to talk, which we hope you will, just unmute yourself. And then we are recording this for future posterity and replay also. And finally, please be kind to our speaker and to each other. We are not here to challenge each other, but to share our thoughts. So, any other announcements? How's everybody doing? Everybody been good? And any traveling going on? Not much traveling at the moment. No. A lot of us making plans to travel later this year, but not much of us traveling yet. Okay, Susie, I see you talking, but you're muted.
I'm going to New York in 3 weeks to visit my
Really?
daughter and grandson.
Good.
My daughter's had the shot and she's had COVID and she's had both shots. So, and I haven't seen them since Christmas. And she said things are opening up and you still wear masks and everything in New York. They're still pretty strict about it. So
What part of the state?
in the city,
Okay.
yeah, she lives in Brooklyn. So he's having vacation that week, and I'm like, well, I don't know. And I thought, well, I've had my shots and you've had your shots, and so anyways, I have to make my reservation today, so I'm excited at the end of the month.
Good. Great. It's funny to hear us talk about getting our shots. It's like we're getting our rabies shots or something, you know. These days we all say, have you got your shots? I've got one, I'm gonna get the other. Yeah. It's an unusual time. Yep. Okay. Well, good to hear that we're getting back to traveling. Some semblance of normality will be returning. Ron, take it away, my friend.
Okay. Somebody asked what resources did I use, and 3 key resources. One, the book called Empathy, Why It Matters, How to Get It, which you see there on the screen by Roman Krznaric. And the other book that I've used for many a class, and I think is one of the best books they have in your library overall, is the book Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Sapolsky. And again, this book at one time was available in our church lobby there in the book rack, selling for a very reasonable price. I don't know who was using it, but it's one of the best books I've ever encountered. And then, of course, you always hear me talking about the great courses. They've got the personality book, Why You Are, Who You Are. But most of the material today came from chapter 14 of Behave, and then from several chapters of Empathy. Okay, as we start off, empathy, sometimes called dispositional empathy, has 3 subcategories. One is cognitive empathy, which means understanding what others are thinking. If you've got some kinds of mental issues like Asperger's syndrome, people with Asperger's syndrome have a great lack of empathy for others and animals. Another kind of empathy is emotional empathy. That's where you not only start to understand what people are thinking, but you start to feel it with your mirror neurons. And then finally, you get to the empathetic concern, where you not only feel it, understand it, but you want to kind of take some kind of action. We'll talk a little more in a few minutes as we dig deeper into those. So why do you want empathy? Well, for one thing, empathetic people have better relationships. If at least one partner in a relationship scores high in empathy, both partners will say and score on a survey and say, yeah, we got a pretty good relationship. So high empathy is good, very good for improving relationships. People with high empathy tend to have better marriages or relationships with significant others, certainly relationships with family. The high empathy individual feels better about the relationship. And even if only one partner is high in empathy, the receiving partner benefits greatly because they tend to get their emotional needs met much better. Okay, here's one that should be no surprise to any people. Empathy is far more abundant in certain professions. I think everybody would give thumbs up to this. The professions, of course, that attract empathetic people are things like teachers, doctors, nurses, therapists, social workers, pastors, and people-oriented service workers. We've all seen that. Almost everybody in their life can talk about the nurse that treated them so well when they were in the hospital, their psychiatrist or counselor that would understand them, really dig deep. Teacher, most teachers have a good bit of empathy. They care about others and their students. And the ones that excel in that tend to be better teachers. Okay. High empathy is good for your physical and mental health. If you have high empathy, you're going to live longer. It's a fact. The high empathy people have lower stress, lower anxiety, less feelings of hopelessness, lower depression, and if they do have bouts of depression, they come out of it quicker, and overall better psychological indicators. There is a genetic basis to it. It's, of course, not entirely genetic, but there is a partial component of genetics in your empathetic character. And there's the ability to read emotions, which is partially genetic, and the ability to go one step beyond reading emotions to understand what people are thinking. And just seeing emotions and recognizing emotions still doesn't necessarily give you understanding of what's behind that emotion, what triggered it, what is the person thinking. All right. Here's a subject I love, parenting and empathy. You often ask the question, how did Sally or how did Ben turn out to be such caring, empathetic people? You see it in children, you see it in adults as they grow up, and the scholars pretty much say parenting plays a significant, if not the most dominant role in determining the empathy of all of us. And of course, the best family environment for generating empathy is an environment that satisfies the child's emotional needs, an environment that discourages excessive self-concern. Good families raising children will try not to raise self-centered, fear, and anxious children. And we'll talk in a minute about how do you do that. And parental modeling that shows emotional sensitivity and responsiveness generates empathy. In other words, you don't want a parent who just tells the kids, shut up and go to bed. They listen to them, they talk to them. They're able to develop relationships. Now, fortunately, even if you didn't get as good a family environment as you would have liked growing up, nobody did. I mean, parents are people too, nobody's perfect. But it is possible to expand our empathy as we get older. So it's not a hopeless case if you weren't raised in a great empathetic family. I want to stop here and ask people, what did you think you got from your parents that most contributed to making you more empathetic? Or maybe your parents fell short in that area. Let's get some ideas. Unmute yourself and let any comments?
My dad was a psychiatric social worker.
Okay, we'll move on then. Okay, now comes the question, how did empathy evolve? Why do humans and other creatures have empathy? And it's really just two simple things. To ensure we meet the needs of our offspring. You'll have better reproductive success if you take care of your offspring, be it baby birds or baby raccoons, whatever it is. And then to sustain the mutual assistance required for individual and group survival. And of course, you need more of that in animal kingdoms like people, where people had to learn to band together in tribes, cavemen, whatever, and work as a socially cohesive group. We've seen in the animal kingdom, particularly the higher order intelligent animals have more empathetic characteristic. One of the most intelligent of the chimp and monkey family is the branch they call the bonobos. And they have some of the highest of all degrees of empathy and intelligence. They'll share food in situations where even the chimpanzees won't. So they kind of come out number one next to humans in terms of the trait of empathy. I also have the notes on this diagram saying you need to indoctrinate empathy out of people to make them extreme capitalists. So empathy is kind of built into the human race to different degrees. And empathy is also the one weapon in the human repertoire that can help us get rid of xenophobia, which is inability to accept strangers and people of other nations and tribes. Okay, so let's go back to, we mentioned there were three pieces of empathy, and let's dig into them just a little more. We talked about the first step was understanding what others are thinking. You've got I think it was a song by Mac Davis that said, walk a mile in my shoes. And it's an old Indian saying, walk a mile in somebody else's moccasins. So first thing is to understand what the other person is thinking. The next step is to feel it. And we can notice that that emotion starts coming in if we start thinking about others. The danger of feeling it, and feeling it is good, but we have to be careful that we don't feel it to such a degree that it starts to distress us and work us so hard that our primary concern isn't to help the person feeling distress or hurting, but our focus becomes, how can I relieve my own anguish? And you can say your sympathy turns into self-healing. You start to focus it all on getting rid of your feeling of anguish and sympathy and not doing enough to try to help the other person. So that's the danger of feeling it too strongly and not making it to the next step. The next step, of course, is wanting to make this person or animal that's hurting, that needs our sympathy, and we want to help them. And that's where compassion, and that's where you're actually led to help. Not only do you want to help, but you try to do something. Now, we've all experienced cases where we can do sometimes something significant to help somebody in need that's hurting. There's other cases where, unfortunately, you can't do much. Maybe you've got a cousin in North Dakota that you can maybe send them a card or talk to them on the phone, or even go visit them a couple days, but you can't do anything instantly. Also, in the study of our brainwave analysis, it shows that you can help people out of empathy or more out of a sense of reciprocity, saying, well, they did something for me, I need to do something for them. So there's that part of empathy. A little humor. I like Yogi Berra sayings. He said, always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours.
That's good.
But we need to try to work from to carry our empathy into the full stage. We need to go from sympathy to empathy to compassion.
Hey, Ron,
Yeah.
you remember in the Star Trek Next Generation series, they had a character who was an empath. She called herself an empath, felt extreme connection with other people and their hurts and their feelings.
Yeah, yeah. Could read emotions and feel their feelings. Yep, sure do. Okay, as we mentioned, empathy appears not only in humans, but in the animal kingdom. I remember 40 years ago, Alice was in a kitchen in Ohio, and a wooden stool in the kitchen, fell over and landed on her foot, and it hurt like heck. And she cried out, and we had a really friendly, personable Siamese cat. And that cat came over immediately and started, meow, just giving her, rubs and cries of sympathy. It's clearly a sign that cats and dogs can give you sympathy. And I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have a dog right now, but I know probably everybody in the class that's got a dog can probably relate a story where the dog showed you empathy and reacted to your sense of sorrow or grief or pain. And they see this in many animal kingdom species. There was a TV documentary where they showed this little elephant got trapped in kind of a mud pit. And he's trapped for about an hour, and he's separated from his herd. But another elephant herd came along, spotted him, and they filmed it and spent a good hour working on getting that other little guy out of the mud pit. And they successfully extricated him and got him out, rescued him. Definitely a case where an intelligent being, an elephant, will go to the help of others of their kind. And they've done experiments with rats in cages and find that they also have empathy for their fellow cage mates. And the degree of empathy they show depends upon whether the other rat is a cage mate, and if it's not a cage mate, if it's fairly close to them in the family of rats. In other words, they feel more empathy for the ones that look and act and are colorized more like them. Even the mother hen will show empathetic distress when her chicks experience even mild discomfort. So empathy does appear all through the animal kingdom. Okay, well, in one of our recent lessons, we talked about the banana-shaped structure in your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. I could nickname the ACC. I mentioned that it makes me think of Aurora and Arapahoe community colleges because it's a fairly thinking part of the brain. But they said all empathy roads pass through the ACC. The amygdala does get involved, but the ACC is probably a little more important. And they say the ACC, this banana-shaped structure in our brains, processes both interoceptive and exteroceptive information. Now, what do we mean by that? Interoceptive means information that is coming from within your body. That your body is always telling the brain, certainly the ACC, of things like achy muscles, hurting back, dry mouth, drippy sinus, bowels in an uproar, a racing heart. That's internal information. But that information does come to the ACC, and of course it affects your moods, and it's playing a role in your life every day, especially if you're getting pain. ACC takes particular notice of pain. The ACC also takes particular notice of unexpected information. If you look at that picture carefully, and you do have to look at it carefully, can everybody see the mountain lion? See in the center? Okay.
Oh, yeah, the face of the
Yeah,
lion.
the face. But the ACC in particular takes particular notice of unexpected information. Unexpected information could be a sudden sound, something that's, quote, out of place. It's a warning. It's always on the lookout for unexpected information. All right. The ACC, as we said, not only evaluates intero or internally generated information, but coming in through the various senses. And it not only looks for physical pain, but it looks for abstract pain. When I say abstract pain, social and emotional pain. Those feelings we get when we feel a sense of rejection. We walk into a room to see our cousin that we haven't seen in a year and they ignore us, or we socially go in at work expecting to be welcomed back after an absence and nobody shows any signs. So our ACC picks up not only physical pain, but emotional and social pain. Okay. So the ACC is strongly involved in empathy, and the more painful the situation is, the more the ACC is activated. Is someone trying to talk here? Has a question? Okay. It's difficult to measure sometimes how much of your empathy is involved with the other person and how much is involved with you. When we see pain, we think, wow, that must hurt like heck. Or I'm staying away from that. That must really, really hurt. But the ACC is central to learning fear and conditioned avoidance by observation alone. And again, as Yogi Berra, our baseball scholar, said, you can observe a lot just by watching. Okay. So again, not only is the ACC involved, but the amygdala and another part of the brain called the insula are involved. And the intensity of empathy we feel depends on the, here's a big word, proclivity of the person to empathy. And that's a lot of how that person's genetic makeup is and how they're feeling at the moment, plus the current situation. And our brain has an empathy gatekeeper. And one of the things the gatekeeper of empathy in our brain looks at is, did the person deserve that pain? You say, now what do you mean by that? Well, if you hear about somebody that got roaring drunk and then walked down the sidewalk and flopped on their face, you don't feel as much empathy. You feel like that turkey deserved that, you know? And or we feel really bad when we hear somebody got sprayed with pesticide accidentally. It wasn't their fault at all. But you don't feel as much empathy if you feel like the person sort of deserved it through their own stupidity, carelessness, whatever. So we've got an empathy gatekeeper. It's also more difficult to generate empathy the more distant people get from us. If they're not a member of our family or friend circle, if they're not a member of our tribe, and when I say tribe, that means your race or your nationality, we have to kick in the higher parts of the brain more to get empathy for those less like us. There was one hospital chaplain that noted he had to make sure when he did the rounds of the hospital to talk to people and to comfort them, that he didn't give preferential treatment to those that he called were Yavises, young, attractive, verbal, intelligent, or social people. We tend to give a little more empathy to handsome people, to young people, to more socially prominent people. You need more emotion and cognition you particularly need to work the frontal lobes of the brain more to give empathy to those people who are less like us. Here should come a statement that should be no surprise. The female brain is better wired for empathy than men. And I've put two pictures there of a man and a woman. You'll recognize those folks. But I think you would say in general, and it's generalities, you will see women generally having more empathy. They've found this in compassion training as they've tried to train people for compassion and roles. The women are more responsive to compassion training than men. Men tend to be more hard-hearted. I worked at a firm 25 years ago, and there was this one very high person in the building that had a lot of power, but they were known for being rather, well, cold-hearted, to put it bluntly, mean, bullying, power-hungry. And the person had a heart attack, and I remember one guy saying, "Gee, I didn't know you could I thought you had to have a heart to have a heart attack." So how was that as a statement? But it does say that some people, definitely have more heart than others. What was it? The musical Damn Yankees, they sang the song, "Oh, you gotta have heart. Oh, you gotta have a heart." I like that song. The good news is, though, even if we're a little low on empathy, and even if we're poor males that are a bit deficient in that area, it's not so much how much empathy you were born with, but the extent to which you're willing to develop it. So it's not hopeless. If you really want to make an effort to improve your empathy and be better at it, you can do it. We can compete with the women somewhat if we make a good effort. Okay, we mentioned genetic differences. The scientists have found out there's something in the brain called mirror neurons. And these are neurons in our brain that get activated when we experience something or when we see something, when we see someone else go through an experience. So we actually, when we experience empathy, our mirror neurons start to activate and replicate and duplicate and create a little model of what we see the other person going through. And chemically, they've shown that the important chemicals, oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, are released when we see somebody else in distress. So we can chemically find these three substances going up and getting released into our body when who are super selfish and very low in empathy have low oxytocin release. They're just not getting chemically as activated by the feeling of empathy as the high empathy people are. Okay, now here's some correlations that we probably wish weren't so. On the average, and this is just on the average, the wealthier people are, the less empathy they report for people in distress. So Unfortunately, the movie A Christmas Carol, Scrooge got more and more money. It was making him more selfish, less empathetic, and there's definitely a correlation. You got to work at it harder if you come into a whole lot of money to be as empathetic. And wealthier people are more likely to endorse greed is good. In the movie Wall Street, modeled after the Wall Street financier Gordon Gekko, remember he had the phrase, greed is good. Also, the political philosopher Ayn Rand put out a book, Atlas Denied, or something like that. But her book basically says, unfettered selfishness is good and altruism is destructive. So it definitely took, her philosophy definitely said, greed is good, looking out for number one is good, focus on yourself, that's the secret to life. And of course, I think if you read the Gospels, that's the exact antithesis of the message of the Gospels and Christianity. Okay. As we mentioned, empathy tends to be ethnocentric. In other words, we definitely have a propensity to feel more empathy for those in our tribe, and the closer they are to our tribe, the more empathy we feel. And we have to fight harder to generate empathy for people that don't look as much like us. That means if you want to quench empathy, if you want to try to kill a social justice movement, you try to find pictures of the least desirable of that other group. In other words, here's a picture of someone lying in a gutter, half drunk or drug crazed, and they will try to show you pictures of people in that other group in a state of undesirability, and that tends to suppress and kill empathy. And again, another issue is what we call empathy fatigue. And that is if we get put in a position like working in a 4077 MASH unit, taking care of critically injured people all day, every day, and seeing tremendous pain, suffering. Our human tendency is to tend to block it out, partially for our own protection. We can only take so much stress. And they found that humans have what we call empathy fatigue. When we get repeated exposure and continuous exposure to pain and suffering, we have to try to defend ourselves by becoming a little more distant and cutting off some of our empathy. Okay. Empathy, as we mentioned earlier, can also offer a dangerous sense of completion. Sometimes we see a poor animal in distress, we feel terrible, and we go through suffering and hurt and pain, but we stop there. We spend all of our effort trying to make ourselves feel better and forget about trying to help the poor animal or do something. So they find that we need to try to get an other-oriented perception when we see something bad happening. We're now going to mention a Buddhist approach. The Buddhists, when they see something going bad, they try to teach to focus their thought on compassion. They say, when they teach the Buddhist philosophy, they say, try to think of what you can do to help that person. Focus on how can I help? What can I do? And less on just feeling the emotion of pain. Concentrate on what can I do? And of course, the answer is in some cases, you can't do much. But still, if you can, try to focus on that third step, what can I do? An example, there was a lady that was badly injured, or not, she wasn't badly injured, but her parents were killed in a car wreck. And they asked people to listen to a recording of this young woman in distress. She's in distress because her parents have been killed in a car accident. And they told one group, as you listen to this woman, focus on the facts. Get as many facts correct as you can as you listen. They told the other group, don't worry so much about the facts, but try to imagine the experiences and feelings of the woman. And then when they were done, they compared the two groups. And the group that concentrated on the facts, like an engineer or a detective, just give me the facts, didn't have as much empathy as the group that was told to concentrate on imagining the experiences and the feelings. And the second group had more empathy and were more likely to give more generous donations to help the surviving younger brother and sister. Okay, again, going back to the roots of empathy, many education experts believe teaching empathy skills is as important as reading, writing, and math, and is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence. And many feel that teaching empathy in churches is more important than doctrine. And I kind of agree with that. Do you want to concentrate on teaching the kids in a Sunday school class about the factual details of a biblical story, or do you want to draw out the meaning of it and how it applies and what our responsibility should be? In other words, what would Jesus do, not memorizing the facts or being able to recite all the doctrine? So I think most of us would probably agree with that. One judge that was at the Nuremberg trial in Germany right after World War II described the war crimes of the Germans tried as a failure of empathy. And going further on that, here are some of the blockades to empathy. Prejudice. In other words, a lot of people immediately turn off empathy if it's not somebody in their group. They say, we don't like yuppies, rednecks, punks, fundamentalists, nerds, whatever. Authority and authoritarianism is also bad. And this relates to some of the lessons we did a few weeks ago on authoritarianism. Some of the people who knocked that empathy out of their lives best, and that's a bad thing, were just told, well, I was just following the authority figure. When Adolf Eichmann was tried, when he was captured by Israeli agents and brought back to Israel in about 1962, he said he said, I know I was killing these people, but I was just following orders. So just following an authority figure and just following authority can, if they're doing something bad, be a terrible thing and kill empathy. Distance, of course, distance physical or socially, and then denial will help kill empathy, which we don't want to happen. Oskar Schindler, who was featured in the movie Schindler's List, was credited with saving the lives of at least 1,100 Jews from the Holocaust. And they said he really, before the war and even as the war started, you wouldn't have put him on a moral pedestal. He said he was a Nazi party member. He loved booze and cognac. He was always making sexual advances to voluptuous secretaries. He was anything but a moral pinnacle to be followed. But as he got to know, as the war proceeded and he ran his factory, he got to know his Jewish accountant, a guy by the name of Itzhak Stern, and then got to know his Jewish factory workers. He was also off on dalliance picnic with one of his mistresses in Poland when he saw a Jewish roundup going on in the town below him on a hillside. And he saw the horrible things that the SS was doing to Jewish people that were rounding up. So he was molded and changed pretty quickly as he got to know people and he got to see the realities of the Nazi horrors. There's also the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe, famous for writing the book, as Lincoln said, So You're the Little Lady Who Started the Big War. She, of course, wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she gave birth to her sixth child, Charlie, in the Cincinnati area around 1848. And little Charlie, and there's a picture of him, died at the age of 1.5 of a cholera outbreak that swept through Cincinnati and killed some 9,000 people there. And she was in extreme grief for a long period of time, but that grief experience helped her realize the pain that Black mothers were suffering when they were separated from their children in places like New Orleans at the slave block auctions. But it was that emotional experience of losing her own child that she really realized the tremendous pain inflicted upon the Black families by separation. In fact, the more I thought about it, I think the pain of having your children torn away from you would be worse than getting 50 lashes. I really do. Okay, well, I've talked enough. We're going to get into the 6 habits of empathetic people, and we want to get lots of comments here. And we're going to go over 6 questions with the group, so get ready to unmute. And we're going to start with the question, how did experiences of your childhood and youth shape your capacity to empathize? Were there particular people or places that contributed a lot to your empathy?
My dad was a social worker.
Ron, I've got a funny short story I'll share very quickly about that for myself. I grew up out in the country near Kansas City and was a hunter when I was in my young years and young teenage years, and enjoyed hunting small animals, birds, rabbits, squirrels, and I just got a lot of pleasure out of that until one day I finally just saw and realized the suffering I was causing the poor little critters by shooting them with my .22 rifle. And it just came over me all of a sudden, and I couldn't hunt them anymore after that. I had kind of an empathetic, maybe chemical release, who knows? And just one day or over a week, it happened, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I've always remembered that.
I'd like to ask a question. Jesus' message was one of empathy, but I don't recall that he used a word like empathy. I wonder if they had a word empathy in their vocabulary. Does anyone have any information on that?
I think we need a Greek scholar, although I know the Greek language has many words for love, agape, phileo. So I think some of those Greek words for love also carry empathy within them.
For me, that an experience that I had was our church youth group took turkeys to some people in a poor neighborhood in our city. And I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, which is at that time was certainly very white, very middle class. And I was absolutely shocked that some of the places that we were taking these turkeys had dirt floors in my neighborhood.
How about teachers? Did anybody have a teacher, be it a church or a school teacher, that taught them empathy?
My daughter had a teacher in high school. We lived in Cincinnati,
Ah,
in Finneytown, and he used to feed the homeless. Like, he'd go down there once a week. And my daughter got involved in that. And then he took them to the Appalachians for a trip to see all that. And she was all involved in that. And she's a social worker now. She works in hospice. So Mr. Elliott was a total role model to those kids for years.
right.
Ron, what makes me think about this is the exposure. I think of Oscar Schindler in that he was exposed to different types of people than that sound like. I love that movie too. That he was exposed. So because of that exposure, I wonder through your reading, you know, when you see people that haven't been exposed to other people, blue, black, brown, orange, green, you know, all the different people in the world and different types, how, you know, you wonder how could they be empathetic when they only know themselves and that their type of people, you know,
Their clan.
their clan. And I think that's helped me over my musician years, being exposed to different types of people to be more empathetic and identify that they're people. We're all people, but exposure is what I wonder.
Bob, I think about that too with Jesus maybe having that exposure in his young years, what led to him having greater empathy and really challenging that separation of his time, you know, saying that everybody is in such tight cliques and you shouldn't, you're a Jew, you don't be empathetic to Gentiles or Samaritans, kind of thing.
Yeah, Steve, I really think that's a big part of what we're going through even right now, that people don't want to,
People don't know other people.
they don't want to know other people other than their clan for some reason, really siloed.
Mhm.
I saw a shirt on TV with, you know, writing on it, and it said, make a friend of someone that doesn't look like you, and you might just change the world. I bought that shirt, so I'll wear it to class sometime.
I think clearly the trips that the church youth groups take to do various projects in the western region of the country probably helps a lot of them a great deal to get an understanding of, quote, how the other half lives and some of the aspects of poverty.
You know, when you mention poverty, that's interesting because I only scratched on the surface of trying to understand that. When giving those bags out, we really did that a lot with the food and the supplies. And the one story I wanted to do more than just hand it out from my car window, and the fear I felt to get out of that car and park and actually go give it to give some of those to the homeless personally. Oh my gosh, you know what I mean? And how that really changed, or it changes how I think about that whole situation, you know, by forcing myself. I think we all should do that potentially more, is force ourselves to be exposed to a situation that we just don't feel comfortable in,
Good point.
to more fully understand. But
Hey, Ron, I'll give you an example that I witnessed, and it had to do with my 7-year-old granddaughter. We were up in Frisco, and behind the Walmart, there is a lake that is frozen over, And they have a Zamboni that does clear it once in a while. And the high school hockey teams will use that to practice on. And my 7-year-old granddaughter, and her family were there. And the granddaughter went over to this one young man who had a handicap, and he was trying to shovel the snow off of the frozen pond. And my daughter and her husband did not witness this nor hear this, and they insisted that they had to leave to come back to have lunch with us. Well, when my granddaughter got home, she was distraught because she asked, could she help? And this young man said yes, and then she wasn't allowed to help. So she insisted that they go back, which they did, and they found that young man had left, and there were some other young men there, but she insisted that she helped, and she took the shovel and she helped for a while. So I think she provided witness for me what empathy could possibly look like.
You know, I think too that one of the hardest things as a human is to not be seen. I hate being ignored. And I've found, I mean, this is a small thing to do, but when I'm driving and there is a homeless person parked, you know, where he can see me, I cannot look away. I look at them, make eye contact, smile, and wave. And it's like you've given them a meal. See them.
A couple of weeks ago, I was at Jason's Deli over there in Park Meadows, and there was a man on the curb, and he was homeless. I could tell, and I'm not a very empathetic person, but I'm getting better. And he had a dog. Well, the dog did it for me. I mean, that was it. Any homeless person with a dog. So I went over and gave him $20. And I talked to him, which I've never, I said, are you homeless? And he said, yes. I knew he was because he had no teeth. And I said, why don't you go to a shelter? I mean, we had this conversation, and he said he couldn't because he didn't have money enough to get shots for the dog, And I wish I would have taken it a little bit further. That's the first time I've ever done that. And it was the dog. And
I
so
love that.
when I was in New York, because my daughter lives there, we were walking down the street in Manhattan, and there was a guy who was on the curb with a dog. So I had to stop and give him money for food for the dog. And my daughter was like, Mother. And I said, yes, the dog has to have some food. But the one here really did it more for me. I wish I could have done more. I kept thinking about it,
I love it, Susie.
It's always animals. I have a thing about animals. I'm way more empathetic over animals than I am with people. And I don't know why.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good stories, Susie and Lola. Lois, do you have a question? I see your hand is raised. Unmute yourself. You got to unmute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen. There you go. Go ahead, Lois.
Okay. I want to tell you about, we lived in Rapid City, South Dakota, and right next to us is the Indian reservation. And so periodically we would go there. And if you want to see a place where we could, lots and lots of places have dirt floors, and they have virtually nothing, but that's a place where it could help a lot. And we used to keep giving and giving to them. And sometimes, people said, yeah, we give to them, but it goes down to the trash. They don't, care for it. So anyway, you get two attitudes there, but they do need help. They really do, Well, anyway, just wanted to tell you. I'll tell you another thing that's kind of embarrassing in a way, because I taught, I had a third grade class, one of my first ones when I got out of college. And in this class was a little girl who had a urinating problem, very urinating. Urinate, no control at all, urinated through. And in those days, we sat in a little, sort of a little chair of their own, and their books were underneath in a little drawer. So every day, urinated through, down through the drawer, get all the books wet, everything, you know. Every day we had to clean it, talk, you know. I always had that very, very carefully. And I talked to her parents. They didn't have money to do anything, you know, to go to a doctor or whatever. So they just lived with it. But the poor little girl, she was so happy and delightful. Believe it or not, her name was Lois.
Aw.
So anyway, we got through third grade, you know, but you know, if you don't be careful in those cases, you can have 30, and in those days we had 30 kids in the classroom. You can have 30 other kids looking on with terrible attitudes, you know, meanness of all kinds. So you really have to help out that poor little one and manage 30 others to have the right attitude. You know, it's kind of a challenging thing, but very worthwhile, very worthwhile. I have no idea what happened to her. I don't know where she is now or anything, but she's living on. She was younger than I, so it's a very rewarding kind of a job, those teaching jobs, you know, very, very minor things, but yet probably influence a person for the next 70 or 80 years. So, you know, it's a very, you just don't even know it, you know, you just, you know, it's just something you want to do for them. You know, you feel very, very empathetic for that, because think of how it would be for yourself, you know, you can't help but think of them. Yeah.
Thank you, Lois. Good
Yeah.
story. It's 11:26. Ron, quick question, please. A lot of people say today that the immigration issue in America is an example of empathy or not empathy. You either empathize with the people trying to come across, or you see them as the other that should be kept out. What do you think about that?
I think there's two sides to it.
Yeah.
Obviously you can't let everybody in all the time, everywhere.
That's true.
It's unfortunate, but you're also right that the degree of empathy we feel is a major factor in it.
Well, they used to have, I don't know if it still exists or not, but for someone to come into the country, they had to have a sponsor, you know, someone who would agree to help them if they needed help, and so that they would not become a public charge. And I've sponsored some people to become citizens and had to do the same thing, but you know, they were already here. I don't know what they do with people crossing the border. I would imagine that they don't have any sponsors, but to me, that would be a partial solution to the problem to at least control it. As Ron says, you know, we can't let everybody in, but every country has the right to control their borders. So it's a very knotty issue.
Well, with no management or control, we're not helping any of them. They're all just on their own, you might say. We can't help all of them, so we're really not. There's such a big group, we're not helping at all. You know, it seems like we need some kind of management or something.
Yeah. It's a tough issue. We could talk for an hour on that, and maybe we will soon.
Steve?
Ron, any final thoughts? Go ahead, Jim.
I'm in a class, study class with Cindy Click, who runs the youth operation.
Sure.
And I thought it might be interesting to have her come and talk to us sometime to let us know about how she feels about the youth today. You know, she's optimistic and so on.
Good idea.
And because a lot of us are very far from the youth, so we don't know what's
Yeah.
going on unless we have them in our families.
Yeah, good idea, Jim.
Mhm.
I also want to point out in concluding that even though the pandemic and our current situation is certainly keeping us out of touch with people of other races and religions and tribes, we can still be open to people within our own group that are suffering in many ways. I remember in 8th grade, Mr. Battistone in history class came in one morning and said there was a gal in our class that had a terrible weight problem. And he said she had been bullied and harassed so badly on the bus several days, she had a nervous breakdown.
Oh my.
And so there's people within our own midst that are they're carrying hurts in our own church, in our own class. They're carrying terrible burdens, health, family situations. And so our need for empathy, it's closer than you think. There's even people within our own immediate families that often need empathy. So our empathy roads are not all blocked off, even right now. There's plenty of opportunities to express empathy and do something.
Hey, Steve, if I could make a real quick announcement.
Sure, Joey, go ahead.
9 Health is partnering with many small vaccine sites, and they are looking for volunteers to help with those sites. So if anybody's interested, you can go to 9healthvolunteer.org. And there's a list and you just sign up right online. And you can
Great.
help at their clinics. Yep.
Thank you, Joey. We can empathize with that need. Yeah.
Definitely.
Shane and I just got our second shots Friday, so we feel a new kind of happy
Freedom.
about having that completed.
Right.
Is there anybody in
get-
the class this morning?
Did you
that
feel
hasn't
sick
had-
from your second shot?
No,
No.
we have no reactions at all, either for the first one or the second one. So we're very fortunate, thankful.
Great.
My second one's coming up on Friday.
Mine too. Ron, you start to say something?
I was just going to ask if there's anybody on Zoom today that hasn't had shot number 1 yet. Is there anybody? Susan, okay.
Susan.
Very good.
Boy,
Well,
that's
it's,
pretty good. That many.
that is.
Susan, you're in Canada, are you not? And how is the program going there?
Terrible. It's really, really, really discouraging. We, the last chart I saw a couple days ago is that we're out of we're way down. Like there are 40 countries that per capita have vaccinated more of their population than Canada. It's been a disaster.
That surprises me because Canadians are usually well organized.
Well, yeah, we purchased a lot of vaccine, but the timing of the distribution has been a problem. So hopefully we'll catch up, but I'm not going to be eligible for probably till August or September.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I know. It's really a drag.
Oh. Well, we empathize with you, Susan. Hang in
Thank
there.
you. Thank you.
We've got to wrap up. It's 11:34. Thank you, Ron, for another really good presentation. We appreciate your
Yeah, good
work
job.
on these so much.
Yeah.
And glad you pointed out how this is a connection to our faith too. Ron did a good job of explaining it's vital to our faith as Christians. So everybody have a good weekend and we'll see you next Sunday, hopefully.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Hmm.